Hello all, this is a part 2 of chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. In the part 2, we will discuss about emotion and its similarity and differences among cultures, different theories and hypotheses of emotions, and last, ways to live a meaningful life. So, how do you think our emotions are related to motivation? It is very related. For example, if you're feeling happy and excited, you probably are more motivated in doing something. But if you are feeling sad, then you might be less motivated in doing something. And our emotions can influence our physiological responses, how we think and how we behave. So if an individual is very anxious in giving a presentation in class, she or he may experience sweaty palms, worry excessively about the presentation, or talk very fast while giving a presentation. Regarding the biological factors, which part of the brain do you think emotions are involved? We haven't covered the chapter on brain and behavior yet, but amygdala is known to be related with emotion. And there are two paths that are involved in emotional fear. There is the direct and indirect path. So the blue line you see in this figure is the indirect pathway, where it moves to amygdala but through our visual cortex. And the red dotted line is the direct pathway, which goes directly to the amygdala. Because the direct pathway takes shorter time to send the information to the amygdala compared to the indirect pathway, when we see something fearful, like a snake, we actually fear first, even before recognizing what we just saw. So in this particular example, the direct pathway will allow us, for example, shout danger, and we react before the indirect pathway allows us to recognize it's a snake. So how does emotion differ across cultures? Well, the research shows that facial expressions do not differ from one culture to another. So, can you tell what each of these facial expressions is representing? Starting from the top left and moving to the right, it is representing happiness, anger, and sadness. And on the bottom row, again starting from the left to right, it is representing surprise, disgust, and fear. Did you get most of them right? But one thing to know is that although our facial expression does not differ across cultures, our display rules does differ across cultures. Display rules is the standard or the norms that determine when, where, and how emotion should be expressed. So for example, in a classical study that was conducted in the 1970s, they demonstrated cross-cultural differences in display rules among American and Japanese participants watching stressful video clips under two conditions: once alone and once with an experimenter in the room. The participants from both cultures produced similar facial expressions when watching the video clip alone, but with the presence of the experimenter, the Japanese masked their negative emotion through smiles. And the American participants, on the other hand, continued to display their negative emotion in front of the experimenter. And so this can be explained by differences in the display rules between Japanese and US participants. Another cultural differences may exist in how we identify faces or facial expressions. So when you try to detect these facial expressions, which part of the face did you focus on? Based on research, Western participants tended to identify facial expression by focusing more around the mouth, whereas East Asian participants focused more around the eyes, So, have you seen these faces before? I know that less people use these icons because we now have emojis, but these are used in Western countries. How about these faces? These are mainly used in Asian countries. Do you see any patterns here? The faces that are used in the Western countries, the eyes are mostly identical, but the mouths are different. But when you see the faces used in the Asian countries, the mouths are pretty identical, but the eyes are different. As we discussed in the previous slide, because depending on where people are from, they might focus on different parts of the faces, so this may be reflective of how these faces were developed. So something interesting to think about. So now we're going to talk about physiological theories of emotion. I don't mean to scare you, but how would you feel and react if you encountered a similar situation like this one? Probably feeling such as fear, scared, or anxious. And what happens after that? An individual might try to run away from the bear, or might tremble or freeze, and begin to express various physiological responses, such as increased heart rate, and may begin to sweat. So this may be the order we think would happen. Again, first experience the fear, and as a result, react. However, some researchers disagree. According to the James Lange theory, it is the opposite way around, where the emotion results from the physiological state. So as a result of running away or experiencing physiological reactions, we start to feel the anxiety or fear. So according to this theory, an individual will say that I am trembling, therefore I am afraid. And other researchers think that the emotion and the physiological reactions occur at the same time. And this is called the Cannon-Bard theory. And according to this theory, an individual will say that I am trembling and feeling afraid at the same time. And there are many other theories out there on emotions, so there is still a lot of mystery surrounding why we have emotions. Another interesting hypothesis on emotion is the facial feedback hypothesis. If you're willing and have a clean and well sanitized pen or pencil right now, gently bite it like in this picture. Which emotion does this facial expression resemble? I know you can't talk right now because if you're biting your pencil, but it is happiness. Basically, you're smiling. So according to this facial feedback hypothesis, facial expressions provide feedback to the brain concerning the emotion being expressed, which in turn causes and intensifies the emotion. So, as you're biting the pencil, this facial expression of happiness will provide feedback to the brain, and you would actually start to feel happy and even intensify this emotion. And you could do a simple, easy experiment. So next time you watch a funny movie, try watching it biting your pencil, and see if your emotion of happiness or joy actually increases or not. Or if you tried it out with your friends. So we all know that there are many different emotions out there. But what might be one way to classify emotion? Frequently, people might consider happiness as positive emotion and sadness as negative emotion. So we could probably classify based on positive versus negative emotion. But in psychology, we use the term valence, which range from positive to unpleasant emotions. Another way to classify emotion is based on the level of arousal. For example, both excited and relaxed can be classified in positive emotion, but they differ in terms of arousal. For emotions with higher level of arousal, they tend to be more active and engaged. And we could actually combine these two classifications or dimensions and develop what it looks like this. This is called the circumplex model of mood or emotion. And why do you think it's important to come up with these different ways of classifying emotions? So first, it's useful when conducting research. For example, we could conduct cross-cultural research or studies to examine if one culture is more likely to express positive emotion versus negative, or emotion with high arousal versus lower arousal. It's also useful in clinical settings. An individual with depression, for example, may be more likely to recognize negative emotion with low arousal, so we might be able to assist them in recognizing other emotions. So there are quite a few applications in using these classification of emotions. And at some point in our lives, we might have heard of the benefits of positive emotions. According to the Broaden and Built model developed by Dr. Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, positive emotion can broaden how we think and behave, where we are more likely to come up with novel thoughts and engage in activities and healthy relationships. This then leads to building increased personal resources, which are known to enhance our overall health, survival, and fulfillment, and ultimately increase our positive emotion. And it acts as a cycle of enhancing positive emotion and making us more resilient. But we also know that we adapt quickly to pleasure. Have you ever imagined yourself driving a really nice car or living in a fancy house? Although how nice it would be if all of these came true, we also know that we as humans will get used to it, and we will keep on wanting more and more and more. This is called hedonic treadmill, like in this figure. According to this model of a hedonic treadmill, as a person makes more money, their expectations and desire rise. So getting these cars or homes result in no permanent gain in happiness. So, what do we do? In addition to the Broaden and Built model we discussed earlier, there are several specific things we could start to implement in our daily lives. First, it's important that we appreciate things we do and encounter daily. Often we realize the importance of something after we lose them. So it becomes important that we appreciate, for example, our health and the presence of others, such by engaging in activities that will keep us stay physically and mentally healthy, and by showing gratitude to others. Or we could engage on positive self-reflection, or we could help others. Next, many studies have shown that expressing gratitude will in fact increase our well-being. For example, you could start writing 3 things that you feel appreciative that day before you go to bed. And that is known to increase your well-being. And last, when making and committing to goals, think of these 3 things: relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Do you remember which theory this was based on? This was from the self-determination theory. And what happens if we include these 3 needs in the goal? It will likely lead to intrinsic motivation, which is what we want. So hopefully some of these ideas will be useful in living a fulfilling and meaningful life. So that is all I have for Chapter 9, Motivation and Emotion. As always, if you have any questions, post it on the Q&A on Canvas. Thanks and take care.